I'm gonna spend some time looking at the differences between the Wesley Chapel area and the Brandon Riverview area. If that's something that you've even thought about, then this video is for you. I'm Sam, and this is the Living in Tampa channel. We are a team of realtors down here in Tampa, so if you do have any real estate specific needs or questions, please call, text, or email anytime. So I've been making videos on this channel for about 18 months, and I've talked to about 2,000 of you that have reached out, have questions about the area, want to move to the area, everything in between. And a very common thing that comes up in these conversations is comparing Wesley Chapel to the Brandon Riverview area. First of all, it's kind of unfair that we're saying the Brandon Riverview area and then we're only saying Wesley Chapel. Let's define these terms a little better. So let's start up here with Wesley Chapel. Wesley Chapel is this suburb, about 60,000 people, kind of northeast of Tampa. It's in Pasco County, this county north of the primary Hillsborough County that Tampa's in. One thing I often end up telling people is that all these towns surrounding Wesley Chapel are pretty similar to Wesley Chapel itself. Except as you go further east and north, so as you go into San Antonio and as you go into Zephyr Hills and Dade City, those are a little different. Those are a little more rural, small town, less suburban. But when you look at Wesley Chapel, right around it, you have Land O'Lakes, Lutz, Odessa, New Tampa. These areas feel very similar to each other, each of them having their own uniqueness, positives and negatives, but all kind of being the northeast suburbs of Tampa. Maybe Wesley Chapel has drawn the most attention because of these new developments like Epperson and Murata, Winding Ridge, all of these. A lot of development up here in the past few years. That has drawn a lot of attention to Wesley Chapel specifically, but often when our clients are looking for a house in Wesley Chapel, they end up looking in these surrounding areas as well. So for now, we're just gonna call these the north suburbs, and all of these suburbs kind of run along Highway 54 up here on the north side of the Tampa area. Okay, now over to Brandon and Riverview, this area that gets lumped together. This is kind of southeast of Tampa, south of I-4. Brandon kind of being the northernmost town in this area as you go south into Riverview, Gibsonton, Apollo Beach, Ruskin, Sun City, and then out into Lithia and Valrico, out into the Fishhawk neighborhood, which I'm going out to Fishhawk next week to make a video about that area. One of the main reasons I want to look at these areas as areas overall is because when you come from a different state, a different city, you're going to think of them that way. You're not just going to think of only the town of Brandon because you don't even really notice whenever you pass into Riverview. Even now, I've been out there a lot. I've sold a lot of houses out there. I still don't really recognize the difference. Overall, when you group these areas like this as the north suburbs and the east suburbs, the population and size is pretty similar among them. So that's kind of why I want to try to compare apples to apples as much as possible. And to make that comparison, we're gonna do some pros and cons for each of these areas. So we'll start with the pros and cons of the north suburbs. Okay, so pro number one of the north suburbs is it's just a little bit nicer overall. The neighborhoods, the shopping, everything is just a little bit higher end. And not like fancy higher end, it's not like that, but comparatively to the east suburbs, it is just a little bit nicer. Number two pro for the north suburbs, and some locals will disagree with me, there is quite a bit more green space. So the neighborhoods are developed in ways that give a lot of green views or water views, if it's just like lakes or ponds, things like that, to a lot of the residents throughout the whole neighborhood. And when you get a drone up in the air, you can see how true this is, or as some of you have been going down on Google Maps and searching, you see that it's like this. And some of this is because this area to the north has just grown a little bit slower than the east suburbs. That Brandon Riverview area from like 2000 to 2005, like grew like 5x. So they had to keep up with that growth somehow, and some of it was by being not as intentional with these developments. That brings us to pro number three. These developments are just a little bit more thoughtful and intentional, where a lot of these houses have views that are appealing, trails that wind throughout. Obviously the Crystal Lagoon, these neighborhoods that are very big, elaborate developments are also up in this area. Okay, pro number four, commuting, it's not normally on the pro list, but from this area, the commute is not so bad. And I'm talking about the whole north suburbs, not just Wesley Chapel. As you get further and further out away from town, if you're commuting into town, obviously it's going to be more difficult. But from this area, there's a lot of different ways to get into Tampa. If you live over in the Odessa, Lutz area, you have easy access to the toll road that goes right down into Tampa. That's actually very affordable compared to most states. I talked to a lot of New Yorkers that are paying, $20, $30 to get across a bridge to get into the city. To pay $2 to $3 to get all the way across town is very reasonable compared to most places. Okay, and the fifth pro for these north suburbs is really good schools. This is really anchored by these schools right here in Lutz, Steinbrenner, McKittrick, and Martinez. One big campus right here in between the Cheval neighborhood and like Villa Rosa, this little area right here. A lot of the residents in Odessa also go to these schools. But then over in Wesley Chapel, you have really good schools like Wiregrass. And then even in Land O'Lakes, you have like Academy at the Lakes, which is a really good private school. So you have a bunch of different options like this. And a lot of people choose this area because of the schools. Okay, now for some of the cons of this north suburb area. Number one is it's expensive. Whenever you compare suburbs around the Tampa area, kind of that typical suburban feel, this area is pretty expensive. Number two is it's competitive. So not only is it still pretty expensive, but post-pandemic, some of the houses up here are still really competitive, especially when they hit that buy box that everybody's looking for, that like 4 to 5 bedroom in a good community, move-in ready with a swimming pool. Those ones are still super competitive. Number three, I know I said the commutes are easier, but I hate commuting. I hate the idea of being stuck on the road every single day. And a lot of people in this suburban area are commuting. If you're working from home, you might be at an advantage in these areas because that's not even a factor for you as a pro or a con. Next, people like to say that this area is closer to the beach than the Brandon Riverview area. If you look at the map, that's not actually true. And that's why this is a con to me. This area is not close to the beach. Now, maybe right now it would take you 5 hours to drive to a beach or 20 hours to drive to a beach. So an hour seems like incredibly close. And if you're in that camp, yeah, it's close to the beach. But I want to be closer to the beach than that. Part of the reason that we moved to Florida was to be close to the beach. And sometimes that just doesn't feel close enough to me. Here's the last con for the north suburbs. It's still developing. And this is kind of a personal con, of course. This is mostly my personal opinion in all of these lists, but I don't really like being around new construction, stuff being built. I don't want to think about what's gonna come and like have an opinion about it. Like I'd rather there just be stuff there and we like make it work with what exists. And all of that is just my opinion. Maybe that's exciting to you, knowing that hey, I'm in early and all of this new development is coming quickly. I can relate with how that would be enjoyable. I'm just not really in that camp. Okay, now on to the south suburbs. Let's start with the pros. Number one is it's cheaper. Your money goes quite a bit further. Same house in a very similar neighborhood is just a little bit cheaper down here. Number two is super similar, but this is kind of how people think about it, so I want to talk about it this way. You can get quite a bit more house for your money. So if that is important, that size or space, inside or outside, then this area might be a good option. The third pro for this area is access to downtown Tampa is pretty easy, and not many people need to go to downtown Tampa. So you might not work there, but you might just want to be able to get there really easily. Maybe you want to go to some hockey games, or you just want to go downtown to eat or things like that. And there's other areas in the whole Tampa area that have good food and good things to do. The downtown area is pretty small, but if you want a very specific downtown experience that's accessible, then these east suburbs win in that category. The fourth pro for this east suburb area is each of these towns is quite a bit bigger. So let's talk about Brandon. Brandon's the main town in this area, over 100,000 people. In the Wesley Chapel area, Wesley Chapel being the main town, 60,000 people. And then all of the surrounding towns around Wesley Chapel are a little bit smaller than all the surrounding towns around Brandon. I just say this because maybe you don't want to live somewhere that feels smaller, you want to live somewhere that feels bigger. That's going to be a pro to a certain kind of person. Okay, the last pro for the east suburb area. As this area is expanding to the south and to the east, there's some really interesting developments. We have a client buying a house right now in this neighborhood, Lake Toscana. It's in Waimama. Strange town, even stranger story behind why it's named Waimama. Maybe I'll tell that story soon. But this house is 3,600 square feet, like big Tuscan style, stucco with a clay roof kind of a house with a big pool on like over an acre. And most of the houses in the neighborhood are very, very similar. Because there's a lot of space out here, there is room to build places like this. And this house is a little bit over $900,000. If this house were up in Wesley Chapel, it would be $1.3 million probably. Okay, and finally for the cons of this east suburb area. Number one, the same as the Pro, it's cheaper. So quality is a little bit lower in some of these neighborhoods. They're a little bit closer together sometimes, and just density in general is higher. Second con, this area grew too fast, in my opinion. In the early 2000s, the population in this area increased by like 500%. And that just kind of broke some of the systems. It caused developers to develop in not a very thoughtful way. It's kind of congested in some of this area, and then all the commuters are stuck going up this one direction into Tampa, whether that's I-75 or 41 or 301. Number three, a lot of the newer developments that seem really reasonably priced, really nice neighborhoods, are pretty far out. Whether that's Sun City Center, Waimama, Apollo Beach, Ruskin, this area is pretty far out there. And because of that, it has a pretty big mix of new and old, suburban and rural. And some people don't care about that, like my client that's buying that house in Waimama, he doesn't really care about that, and you may not either. Fourth con, again, similar to the Wesley Chapel area, is this constant growth and development, and that just kind of bugs me. Maybe I'm just being picky. I live in like an old house in an old neighborhood, and there's something that I really like about that like no one's building any new houses nearby, no one's building any new restaurants. Yeah, you're right. I'm probably just being picky. And the fifth con for this east suburb area is kind of similar. It's pretty chain dominant. You're gonna have a lot of malls and strip malls and things like that, and a lot of them are going to be filled with chains. A lot of this population isn't deriving a lot of interest in new and interesting food and businesses. A lot of that still is in Tampa or over in Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, those kind of areas. Real quick, I want to talk about the kind of person that this comparison doesn't even matter for, because I have a few clients like this as well. Yeah, maybe they're interested in which is better or worse, but let's talk about these 4 factors. If you have all 4 of these factors, then this comparison might not matter as much. If you work from home, if you care more about the house than the surrounding areas, if schools don't matter to you, maybe you have kids but they're grown, and if the main shopping you need is for necessities, you're not thinking about going out and shopping, then either place is fine. We have clients like this. We talked about in the last video, Ruth and Scott. Either place works fine for them. So it's more about the house that they find that fits what they really want that matters. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll like these 2 right here. This top one is from our Tampa Explained series, talking about this whole north suburb area. And then this one down here is a newer one about the best areas for families in the Tampa area. I think these videos will be a great next step as you're trying to understand the area, as you're trying to choose which area is right for you and your family. Thanks for coming by.